The killer phrase was at the end when Kimmel said, "You just don't realize it." Because you see, he's smarter than you, and he needs you to know that. And his ego can't bear that there's someone out there more famous and more influential than him. I got news for you, Kimmel. The last time you mattered, Bruce Jenner still had a penis.
Why did Jimmy Kimmel live with him? Like, Jimmy Kimmel is a talented guy, and I don't think he's like an evil person or something, but he's made this deal where he just serves power and attacks anybody who challenges power. Like, how can, honestly, how can he look in the mirror and say, I'm doing something honorable? Like, how could he live with himself? How could his wife sleep with him?
Well, it'd be
I mean
it'd be one thing.
For years, the late night landscape was a predictable monarchy. You had your kings, your jesters, and an audience that knew exactly what to expect from their nightly dose of topical humor. Jimmy Kimmel, with his everyman appeal and a career trajectory that seemed unshakable, was a formidable presence in this comedic kingdom, a beloved figure who effortlessly blended celebrity charm with sharp wit. His reign felt secure, his influence undeniable. But what if I told you that this seemingly impenetrable empire wasn't just challenged, but utterly shattered not by a conventional rival, but by an unlikeliest of duos from an entirely different corner of the media universe? This isn't just a story about a ratings dip. It's about a public, systemic dismantling, a full-blown comedic demolition that didn't just hurt, it redefined humiliation. Imagine a late-night giant, once a master of ceremonies, suddenly finding his punchlines turned into public therapy sessions, his carefully curated image crumbling before millions. The laughter he once commanded was replaced by a different kind of sound, the distinct echoing silence of an audience that had moved on, and the biting mockery of those who had utterly conquered him. This was the unforeseen, brutal reality that unfolded for Jimmy Kimmel, a fall from grace so complete it left him wondering if witness protection was still an option. What began as casual banter escalated into a strategic, calculated assault that laid bare the fundamental shift in what audiences truly craved, revealing a bitter truth about who was truly funny, who was genuinely insightful, and who had tragically lost their way. The question isn't if he got wrecked, but how badly, and by whom. Prepare to witness the quiet implosion of a late-night legend, orchestrated by two figures who didn't just out-joke him, they outmaneuvered him on every intellectual and cultural battlefield.
Late night host Jimmy Kimmel is back on the air after taking the summer off. He's missed a lot. Kimmel says if you're not vaccinated, you shouldn't get a hospital ICU bed. But I'm not sure if Jimmy was being sincere because he wasn't crying. Anyway, it's just funny hearing someone say I see you, who nobody actually sees. Look, I don't want to suggest that Kimmel's show has become boring and predictable, but last night during the taping, people in the studio audience were changing the channel.
Jimmy Kimmel's journey from hosting The Man Show, a program known for its irreverent, sometimes crude, and often politically incorrect humor, to becoming a prominent figure in late-night television was initially marked by an undeniable charm. He cultivated an image as the relatable guy, unafraid to poke fun at anyone and everyone. His early monologues were sharp, his interviews engaging, and he possessed that unique ability to connect with a broad audience. For a time, he was the undisputed heavyweight champ of late-night comedy, strutting into each monologue with a blissful unawareness that two very different beasts, Greg Gutfeld and Tucker Carlson, were sharpening their claws. But somewhere along the way, a profound and troubling transformation took hold. The comedian who once embraced irreverence seemingly shed his skin, choosing instead to don the robes of Hollywood's self-appointed moral hall monitor. His once edgy humor began to feel increasingly sanitized, his punchlines less like genuine jokes and more like carefully crafted political theses, delivered with a solemn tone and enough smugness to power a small city. He transitioned from a jester for all seasons to, in the eyes of many, the Praetorian Guard for established power, eager to attack anyone who dared challenge the prevailing narrative. This shift from challenging power to serving it seemed to chip away at his authenticity, leaving some to question how he could honestly look in the mirror and declare his work honorable. His show, once a source of lighthearted escape, began to lean heavily into virtue signaling, with monologues that sounded less like comedy and more like public service announcements titled "Kimmel Destroys Democracy, Deniers Again." The spontaneous laughter seemed to recede, replaced by a dull echo of forced indignation, a testament to a comedian who, perhaps, had made a deal that cost him his comedic soul.
And comedians are supposed to hold people in
But he's
positions
a
of power
pure
accountable.
suck-up
Yeah.
to the people in charge.
Exactly.
He's their Praetorian Guard.
Yeah.
And it's like the self-hatred he must feel, because he wasn't always, that's my point. Yeah. I mean, Colbert has always been a hard partisan, talented guy, but obviously he's not a comedian. But Kimmel was a comedian. Like, how does he, I don't understand.
I don't know
how he can sleep.
He might buy into the narrative to the extent that he thinks it's morally wrong to joke about these certain topics.
But it's not just that. He's like pouring hot oil on the peasants from the parapet. Like, he's hurting anyone who challenges the king. It's crazy.
If you are open up to being wrong, you're more than likely going to end up right once in a while. But these guys have been wrong for 8 years. They've been wrong for 8 years because they can't let go of their egos. It's true in the media. It's actually, it's true among the never Trumper Republicans. If you look at the sourpusses, it's an internal emotional feeling that why him, Trump, and not me? Whether it's like, I don't know, Bill Kristol or Jonah Goldberg. It's like, these are guys that were generally normal. And then their egos just kind of like, they just took it hard. And you gotta let go, guys.
While Jimmy Kimmel was busy explaining politics to the kids with a raised eyebrow and all the joy of a substitute teacher during finals week, a truly unexpected force was rising in the late-night landscape, proving that audiences hungered for something raw, rebellious, and unapologetically real. Enter Greg Gutfeld. He wasn't playing by the traditional rules of late night. He was rewriting them on a budget set with nothing but an acerbic wit and a razor-sharp understanding of human nature. Gutfeld is the rebellion personified, the guy who kicked down the late-night club door and said, "You call this edgy? I've got dad jokes that sting harder." His approach was a stark contrast to Kimmel's curated outrage. Gutfeld didn't just respond to the political and cultural currents. He ignited them with comedic flair. He saw humor not as a vehicle for political alignment, but as a scalpel for truth delivery. His takes were clinical, precise, like watching a cat casually knock a wine glass off a table just to see it shatter. Jimmy was the glass, and Greg was the cat. Gutfeld's strength lay in his ability to turn a simple one-liner into a surgeon. General's warning, dissecting egos, and serving up bloated self-importance on a silver platter. He didn't need props, applause signs, or a Harvard writing room. All he needed was Kimmel's own perceived infallibility. His show, despite its shoestring budget and reject sitcom energy, felt more rebellious and alive than anything Kimmel had done in years. Gutfeld understood that true comedy should be uncomfortable. It should sting a little, and it should never, ever feel like a TED Talk that forgot to be interesting. This unconventional style, devoid of the preachy solemnity that had come to define much of late night, resonated powerfully, leading to an unexpected yet undeniable rise to ratings dominance.
It was my belief that humor, these were humorless scolds who just didn't think our jokes were funny, and they thought they were offensive and they were being hypersensitive. And that's not the case.
No, it's not. You're going through the stages of realization.
The stages of realization. I eventually learned and came to realize that it's not humor. Humor is a vehicle for truth delivery. They don't like the fact that the narrative is being challenged in a way that's effective, and so they have to shut you up. And so that's what it's about. It has nothing to do with them being
They don't have
schools
limits. They don't have.
And it has nothing.
Oh, I have a few names to add. CNN, MSNBC, CBS, the town crier. All outlets ignoring Biden's revolving door of gaps. His constant forgetfulness, weird rambling speeches being let off stage. All the while you told us there's nothing to see here. Meanwhile, any parent can see this face means you gotta change a diaper.
But just when it seemed the damage was done, and Kimmel might limp away with whatever was left of his ego, glided Tucker Carlson. Smooth, cold, and utterly unbothered, he entered the fray like a Bond villain who had just learned the world was running out of martinis. Unlike Gutfeld's comedic chaos, Tucker didn't do jokes. He did dismantling. He approached the Kimmel situation not as a comedian, but as an academic, presenting a thesis on the tragedy of the once funny comedian, a case study in relevance lost. His weapon wasn't a punchline, but that signature, slightly smug head tilt that screamed, "I've read 5 more books than you, and I'm about to make you feel it." Carlson's approach was a masterclass in intellectual body slamming. He systematically unpacked Kimmel's evolution, or depending on your tolerance for hypocrisy, his stark regression, with the precision of a forensic accountant. Kimmel, once a clown for all seasons, unafraid to offend everyone equally, was painted by Tucker as a hollow husk of his former self, draped in self-righteousness and walking through applause lines like a comedian cosplaying as a senator. Tucker didn't bother mocking the jokes, he mocked the very need for them. He laid bare how Kimmel's comedy had devolved into a mere safe space for people who wanted to laugh at people, but only the ones they already disliked, and never in a genuinely funny way, but rather in a sanctimonious, eye-roll-inducing coffee shop liberal way. Where Greg Gutfeld lit the fire, Tucker Carlson installed the gas line, walked away, and watched from a glass tower as the whole thing exploded, leaving Kimmel's reflection less Jon Stewart and more off-brand morality guru from a Whole Foods parking lot. His quiet symphony of disdain framed Kimmel not as a failed comedian, but as a tragic transformation story, from rebel to sermonizer, from edgy to echo chamber, the kind of fall from grace that doesn't end with a bang, but a long, painful whimper into irrelevance.
Even the quote comedians, they were on propaganda duty too. Watch this.
He's also pushing U.S. intelligence to find evidence for this theory that the virus was accidentally released from a lab in Wuhan. That's his new angle to feed the wingnuts, to treat this virus like it was a conspiracy of some kind.
It should have never happened. This plague should never have happened. It could have been stopped. But people chose not to stop it.
What people? Tomorrow he'll blame the Spanish flu on Antonio Banderas.
Yeah. Imagine if you're a comedian and all of a sudden your cue card has all kinds of talking points from politicians and foreign governments on it. Don't read it. You degrade yourself and you become complicit in the greatest crime in history.
The combined force of Gutfeld's acerbic wit and Carlson's intellectual dissection created a relentless, double-edged assault on Jimmy Kimmel's perceived comedic authority and relevance. It wasn't a skirmish, it was more like watching a houseplant get thrown into a wood chipper. Slow, oddly satisfying, and entirely one-sided. Gutfeld, operating with the finesse of a seasoned satirist, dropped scalpel-sharp jabs at how Kimmel's show now survived purely off virtue signaling and YouTube clips with titles like "Kimmel Destroys Democracy, Deniers Again." He proved that humor, when wielded as a vehicle for truth delivery and a challenge to narrative, could outmaneuver curated outrage any day. Meanwhile, Tucker, with his almost surgical precision, dissected Kimmel's transition into a propaganda comedian, showing how his comedic cord had become filled with talking points from politicians, making him complicit in what Carlson suggested was a crime in history. He didn't just criticize, he revealed a painful truth about comedians who, instead of holding power accountable, had become its very Praetorian Guard. In the face of this unprecedented onslaught, Kimmel, predictably, couldn't just sit there. He mounted his TV pulpit and attempted to return fire. But his counterattack felt like a sad remix of his previous hits. Predictable jabs at Fox News, recycled mockery of Tucker's long-abandoned bow tie, and another rant about misinformation. The zingers didn't zing, they thudded. It felt like watching a band play their greatest hits at half speed while the audience checked their phones. Viewers noticed the spark was gone, the fire he used to bring replaced with a dull echo. For a guy who once ruled the late-night scene, Kimmel's swing back landed somewhere between a whiff and a gentle breeze, further exposing his declining influence and the palpable disconnect with an audience that had clearly moved on.
So these fellas are experiencing deep mental pain. And it's not just them. Journalists are now offering tips to deal with their disappointment, frustration, even fear. And I get it, that's normal after any loss. I'm still mad about losing World's Sexiest Man to Johnny Depp. But why would people feel fear? Maybe because their only news sources are constantly telling them Trump's gonna turn America into Nazi Germany. But you know who felt actual fear during the Biden administration? People who had to ride the subway or have to buy groceries.
The most damning evidence of this profound shift in late night's hierarchy, however, wasn't found in the critical commentary, but in the cold, unyielding reality of the ratings. Greg Gutfeld's show wasn't just beating Kimmel, it was obliterating. Him and the viewership numbers, a semi-truck plowing through a gluten-free bakery. For a man who once commanded a time slot filled with legends, basking in the glow of Nielsen victories, Jimmy now found himself flailing desperately in Gutfeld's rearview mirror, waving with nothing but canned laughter and moralistic monologues to keep him afloat. The contrast was stark, almost brutal. Gutfeld, with his shoestring budget and unapologetic rebel without a cause energy, had somehow managed to turn one-liners into the highest-rated late-night program, a testament to an audience hungry for authenticity and wit that didn't feel like a lecture. Social media predictably had a field day. The memes poured in faster than Jimmy's Nielsen numbers could drop, side-by-side comparisons. Gutfeld dressed as a late-night barbarian with a flaming microphone, and Tucker as a stoic, sneering librarian closing the book on Jimmy's relevance. The internet crowned them the unlikeliest tag team champions in the arena of cultural humiliation. This wasn't just about who was funnier, it was about who had evolved and who hadn't. Gutfeld, despite being cast by some as the court jester of Fox News, understood one critical thing. Comedy should be uncomfortable, it should sting a little, and it definitely shouldn't feel like a TED Talk that forgot to be interesting. Tucker, never aiming for laughs, understood something else profound. That intellect delivered with a smirk is often more painful than a punchline. Meanwhile, Jimmy was still over there reading jokes like they were sacred scrolls, eyes wide with forced indignation and a grin that silently pleaded, "Please claps." He didn't know he was playing a different game now, one where his opponents weren't just louder or meaner, but sharper, quicker, and devastatingly more self-aware. This monumental shift revealed a seismic change in late-night TV, moving from belly laughs and goofy skits to a suit of political armor, transforming the medium into something resembling C-SPAN with a laugh track taped on.
There are a lot of people who are like on your side because they're for free speech, who are not actually for free speech at all, who are pushing, a very specific foreign policy agenda, for example, and using another issue to lower your defenses and let themselves into your brain. And I think that's really sinister, really, really, really sinister. And it's becoming more obvious now. Like, if you're for free speech, then you're just for free speech because you support the principle.
The job description of a comedian is not so different from the job description of a journalist, as traditionally constituted. Tell the truth about the powerful. Comedians are usually a lot smarter, more clever, and incisive than journalists, but that's what they're supposed to be doing. Almost none still do. Adam Carolla is one of the very few remaining comedians in the United States. He's out with a new book.
As the dust settled on this late-night culture clash, one truth became painfully, undeniably clear. Jimmy Kimmel hadn't been humiliated by merely louder voices or meaner jabs. He had been fundamentally undone by better writing, clearer thinking, and a brand of charisma that doesn't beg for applause. It commands attention. There was no grand debate, no dramatic face-to-face showdown, just two perfectly aimed salvos from opposite towers, reducing Jimmy's carefully constructed pedestal to a pile of laugh track ashes. Gutfeld and Carlson didn't engage in a back-and-forth argument. They simply pointed, laughed, and unapologetically moved on, leaving Kimmel stuck in the echo chamber of his own making. He remained trapped, still explaining jokes that weren't landing, still preaching to a dwindling choir of the converted, still clapping at his own punchlines like the guy at a karaoke bar who genuinely believes he nailed Queen, even as the crowd thinned out and the microphone was unplugged. The most delicious irony of all was that the very people Jimmy had spent years mocking, those he claimed don't get comedy, were now producing the most rebellious and vital comedic content. Gutfeld's show, with its raw, unapologetic energy, felt more alive and impactful than anything Kimmel had produced in years. Tucker Carlson, even without a traditional set, was captivating more attention with monologues filmed in cabins than Kimmel could with the entire backing of a major network. This wasn't a loss, it was a complete and utter obsolescence. The job description of a comedian, traditionally, is not so different from that of a journalist: to tell the truth about the powerful. Comedians are usually smarter, more clever, and incisive. Almost none still do, but Gutfeld and Carlson, from their distinct corners, had rediscovered this core principle, reminding everyone that genuine wit and uncomfortable truths resonate far louder than curated outrage and predictable predictable virtue signals. The lesson was brutal. If you're going to wage war in the land of sarcasm and satire, you need to bring more than recycled outrage and weak punchlines. You need teeth. You need wit. You need something beyond a smug grin and the same 5 political talking points borrowed from Reddit. Otherwise, you'll end up exactly where Jimmy did, at the bottom of a comedic dog pile, wondering why the applause stopped and why the laughter now sounds like mockery. There's something uniquely painful about being humiliated by 2 people who don't even acknowledge your existence as an equal. A quiet fade into an echo of past glory rather than a dramatic crash. He was finished. He just hadn't figured it out yet. Thumb up, thumb down.